Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Cactus Lounge. I am Donna Reed, and I traveled in Up with People in 1976. If you watch this, you probably know that already. And my guest this morning is Bob Kelly. Bob was recommended, referred, suggested by several alumni. So after mismatched schedules, he is here today. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Donna. Good morning. Nice to actually get this done.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
tried many times.
And I ironically I was like, he's from up north, like one of the Dakotas. I couldn't remember, and then I got your email, and it has like what state you're from in your
Yes, that's
email.
right. That's right. That's right.
So tell everybody where you are this morning and
Sure.
maybe when you first learned about Up with People and first traveled.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, so you're probably pretty warm down there in Arizona. I'm actually sitting in Montana, up in Great Falls, Montana is where I live now. I've been here 30 some years. And I went to college in Fort Collins at Colorado State
Okay.
and had never seen a show, but some friends of mine that were in the same dorm that I was in my freshman year came back one night. They were fired up because they had seen a show in Denver. This was 19 for the fall of 72. So
Okay.
I was a freshman in college, and a young guy named Scott Barton, who went on to become a piano player for a couple years, I think, traveling, was very excited about this whole Up with People thing. He told me about it, and I, said that sounds pretty interesting. You sing and you dance and you travel around the world with people from all over. That works for me. How do I get in?
Yeah.
So I ended up doing something a little unusual, I think, in that spring break in the spring of 73. I actually hitchhiked from Fort Collins down to Tucson
Wait, wait, wait.
and
Hitchhiked. There's a whole generation who's or two that have never done that.
yeah, yeah. And I don't recommend it anymore
No.
or picking up people, but at the time it was sort of my mode of transportation to go long distances. I didn't have a car. I think I'd been on a plane once. So when I got down there along the way, I got robbed and beat up, et cetera. And I showed up at a Saturday morning on Campbell Avenue there at the headquarters, and a guy named George Alexander met me.
Yeah.
He asked me how I got there. I told him because all I had was a sleeping bag and a windbreaker. And he said, "So where have you seen the show?" And I said, I've never seen the show. I've just heard a lot about this." And he brought me inside. He gave me a tour of the office, showed me all the pictures for about an hour, and then he sat down and I said, "That's pretty interesting. I think I can do this." And he said, "Okay." And the interview, there was no real interview. He just had his mouth open the whole time, saying, "I cannot believe you came all this way." So at the end of it, we kind of tied up the details. I'm sure he asked me a few questions. He said, "What are you going to do now?" I said, "Can you drop me back on the highway? I'm going to hitchhike back to Fort Collins. I got to go home." It's 1,000 miles. I just looked it up yesterday. I was wondering how far was that. He gave me $20 and he said, "Good luck. Call your parents when you get home and let them know you're safe." I said, "No, I don't tell my parents I do
I
this
was
kind
going to
of
say,
stuff."
did they even know that you were doing
No.
this?
Well, they had some access to that knowledge, but so then the end of that story is that come the summer, we staged at Corona del Mar
Oh,
in California that summer, and it was really a great experience. I was put into a smaller cast, Cast C, which was about 32 or 34 people, not the
so
big cast.
73C.
Yes,
Okay.
73C. So it was
Okay.
A, B, and C at the time. There wasn't a D or E, and
Yeah.
so I think I'm probably one of the few Up with People folks whose first show that I ever saw, I was in it. So it was kind of
See,
fun.
that's why I do these interviews, Bob. I don't know if I emailed you the list of questions in advance or whatever that I created when I started this. And literally I said, did you stage in Tucson or Denver? That's what was in my head. And then you start hearing the stories and you're
Mhm.
like, and where did you see your first show? And I
Right,
have in my
right.
mind that they're going to be all this similar thing. There's nothing similar about us.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, everybody has their own story, especially this group of folks that you speak with. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. Okay. So 73C, did you play an instrument? Were you musically inclined? Like what any of that or
I had zero talent, I could sing a little bit and move a little bit. They didn't let me near an instrument, which was wise. We had you had to do everything really. I
yeah, in a small group like
in a
that?
small group like that. Yeah, we're very mobile. We traveled a lot for corporate stuff. We did Aloha Airlines over in Hawaii. We
Oh,
were supposed to go to Berlin to an air show that got canceled at the last minute. We did some big shows in DC for accounting groups and corporate type things. And we ended our year in Spokane. We did Spokane's Expo 74. And
so were you
that
still
was
just that group? Were you that small group for the expo? You were still like the whole
yeah,
year?
yeah,
Wow.
we were. We did go to Europe and we joined, I think, or we stole some people from Cast A to be a bit of a larger group.
Right.
It was a long time ago. And I think we were over there for 5 or 6 weeks and we did the obligatory tour of Belgium, which was always fun. And it was my first time in Europe.
Yeah.
And I remember I got off the plane. Actually, we refueled in Reykjavik, and I asked the attendant, "Can I just walk down the steps here to the tarmac while we refuel?" And of course, it was back then. It was easy. She said,
Yeah.
"Yeah." And I knelt on the ground and kissed the ground because Donna, that was the first place I'd ever been I couldn't hitchhike to. And so I thought
And we
this
made
is
it.
huge. This is huge. Yeah,
And Reykjavik
exactly.
of all places, like that
Yeah,
now,
yeah,
now Iceland is pushing
right.
tourism and
Yeah,
these deals where you can come and you can stay for a day to a week on your way to somewhere else. So more and more
right.
people are going there. That's
Yeah,
fascinating.
we were there for a pit stop only, get some gas and get out of there.
Yeah,
Then Belgium and then back to the States.
and did you fly into Brussels and do,
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so. I didn't keep a tour journal back then. Sorry, Dale. And to my other cast members who might be watching this from down the road. But yeah, I mean, had just a great experience, met a lot of alumni over there, and of course, as you know, Belgium is a very special place for Upwith people, and
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
special place in my heart. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you know then any of the Stroye family?
Who is it?
Stroye,
I
Struye.
didn't. No, my
They,
host sister was uh yeah, it'll come
that's
to
all
me,
right.
but
That's right.
yeah.
No, Stroyes were very involved, and friends with Hans Magnus, and
Hmm.
three of the five kids in that family traveled. And
Oh,
so
okay.
one of them with me, which is again, we were a large cast, but because of the bicentennial in
Right.
76, then there we had like eight non-Americans. We had to make up countries for where people were from, when we
Wow.
were on
Wow.
stage. And
Yeah.
sometimes if they were doing PR, it was even worse. So
Right. It
it would
was
be
the
like, great,
Decellier family. That's who it was. Dion Decellier. She was
just
an
okay.
alumni. She took good
Okay.
care of us over there.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the country I've been to the most in
That's
Europe.
great.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
great.
So, all right. So, you traveled this one year. You started this with a spring break. You're in the middle of school, right? You haven't
Right.
graduated from college.
Right.
What happens in 74 going to 75?
Well, I realized one of those things, everybody says, what'd you learn up with people? And for me, I learned I could pretty much do whatever I wanted to. I mean, it was really great to be amongst people who were very well accomplished and all the challenges you get in your first year. So I ended up moving to Alaska for a year. We had been up there doing a show in Anchorage and in Fairbanks, and Bucky Wright, who was a longtime person, you probably know Bucky.
I know
He
the
had
name.
come up,
Yeah, don't know him well,
yeah,
but know the name.
great
Yeah.
guy. A lot of people watching this will know him. Bucky called me. We had talked. We had done PR up in Alaska together, and he said, "Hey, I'm moving up there to Alaska, and I'm driving a truck." So I ended up meeting him in St. Louis. He had his car in the back of the Ryder rental. We drove for 4 or 5 weeks to Alaska. I was up there for about 6 or 7 months. Came down and went back to the States and down outside here in the lower 48. Ended up working a little bit and then started back to college for a year or two. And my college career took 8 years, but only 8 semesters, I might add, because I kept discovering that there were more fun things to
It
do
was more
than
fun
go
to
to
do these
school.
other things.
Yeah, yeah. But I did finish. I did finish college, I think in 79, somewhere around there, and got
Good,
done,
good,
but had a
good.
lot of fun stuff in between.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So let me ask, while you were in Alaska, then were you like working skiing? Were you working at a hotel? Were you not working?
Actually, we went up there. I did work in a hotel. I had a very glamorous job. I was a room service waiter.
There you
And
go.
Bucky got himself on working with a political campaign, Walter Hickel, who was running for governor again. And so I worked a little bit with him on that, but primarily the way I, paid for groceries was working at a hotel and had a couple interesting jobs there. And
Yeah.
after being there about 6 or 7 months, Bucky moved up to Fairbanks, was
Mm,
settling in up there with the pipeline at the time. There's a lot going on in Alaska in 1974,
Yeah.
and then I decided to come back to the States, to the lower
One
48.
of the interviews that I've done, and I'm not going to remember the name because at this point there's like about 70 of them and I don't remember all the names, but there's a young
Mm-hmm.
lady who is Russian heritage who works at a resort on an island in Alaska, but has Inuit history. She doesn't look like it. She looks like me. Like, in my opinion, she doesn't look like what I would think. And she works at a resort where people, it's like a bear country
Mm,
resort and stuff like
yeah,
that. It's
yeah,
another fascinating story, in my opinion,
yeah,
to live on
yeah,
this tiny island up there.
yeah, for sure.
And yeah, and the stories that we might create in our mind or have had a preconception about, which it takes me back to when you started, you flew in, you hadn't seen a show. So do you feel like you had any thoughts in your mind about what this was going to be and what to expect?
I really didn't. And I think one of the things that was the most fun about it is I knew the basics. I knew the guardrails of travel, young people, music,
Yeah,
internationalism. And I had never really been on an airplane before, except when I went to college. I flew to college once, and so this really appealed to me to go see different places and different things.
right.
And unfortunately, it's a bit of an eye opener when you get this stuff. You have this overstimulation for that year, and
Yeah,
trying to replicate that when you go home is really kind of an interesting thing. And
yeah,
hence the reason I went in and out of school so many times,
yeah.
chasing other jobs and other adventures, and was just glad that I finally got my degree, as were my parents.
You saying that makes me think that it might be akin to being a child star in Hollywood.
Mm,
You're a child star and then you don't, and everybody knows you, and then you don't do
right.
it anymore. You
Well, I
are,
think
you
I
know,
think we all go through that. I mean, that's all part of the Up with People
yeah,
experience, of living in this high elevated plane of activity and visibility, and then trying to figure out how to translate that to your home, whether
right.
you're from nowhere, Arkansas, or you go back to
Or
Manhattan or
Ohio.
whatever. Yeah, or
Yeah,
Ohio.
yeah,
And that was the real challenge, and something I really focused on when I was a cast director, to make sure we knew ways to translate this
yeah,
experience into real life stuff back at home that's not as visible or potentially as exciting.
yeah. So, are you, I'm pretty sure you're of an age, but do you remember On the Road with Charles Kuralt?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
about that often as I visit alumni and there's going to be several generations of people who have no idea what I'm talking about. But how he would go into places and
Mhm.
I did a road trip kind of in the middle of COVID. Things were getting better and I went to towns to visit people who I would not have gone to if they weren't Up with People alumni.
Sure.
And what I felt and discovered during that is not unlike this, that everybody is where they are for a reason. And
Hmm.
every town has a story. And
Hmm.
whether a little teeny mining town that got really big and then is really small again, or whatever it is, that is something that Up with People opened our eyes to.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
as you drive across the country or across Europe or wherever things take you,
Hmm.
you learn the stories of the
Hmm.
people that are there and why they're there,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
what keeps them there. And maybe what keeps them there is they're living in great grandma's house. Like, I don't
Right.
know,
Right. That's right.
you
That's
know,
right.
that kind of a thing. So, when did you go back to Montana or, when did that evolve?
Well, that came a long story. I mean, from the Up with People perspective, in 1980, I ended up going back to Up with People and
Okay.
met Reed Thompson and Jess and Jennifer.
Okay.
I was living in Nashville at the time. I had a real job, and I was not happy with that, and visited with them and said, I don't know if you remember me. I sent Jim McLennan a letter, and I said, but I was that smart ass guy that traveled in KSC, and I think I'd like to come back and maybe contribute a little bit. And that ended up with me being a program director, an educational program director for 1 year. I traveled with Tim Lane; he was my cast director, Tim and Charlotte.
Tim and Char.
And then the next year, I was given a cast. I was cast director for that year. Ended the
So
year
81,
working.
82 now,
I
right?
think so, yeah. And then
Yeah.
SeaWorld,
Oh, yeah.
I worked with a cast at SeaWorld that first year. And then Glenn Shepard, who was the director of education, he was in charge of all the program coordinators. He went on the road with his wife, and
Yeah.
those
Debbie.
guys had a cast, yeah. And I took his job in the office,
Ah,
and kind of was there. And
okay.
then
Okay.
That was in my late 20s, I think, and then ended up parlaying an experience in Houston into a real job, working in the financial markets. And that's what I did as a career. I met a
Okay.
guy who introduced me to banking and finance, and one thing led to another. Fast forward Houston to San Francisco, to
Wow.
Seattle, and then to Great Falls, Montana.
You
So,
really have been all over. Wow.
well, part of that episode there, Donna, and I'll share this with you only because we're on the topic, is that in when I lived in San Francisco, I met my wife, a gal named Sheila Riley. When I was
Mhm.
talking with her, she said that she had 200 and some odd thousand frequent flyer miles. And I said, "What are you going to do with that?" And she said, "Well, I think I might take a few months off and go to a Knowles course or do something." I said, "You know what? You don't know me, but I have friends all over the world. And if you want to do this for 2 years or more, let's do it." And we ended up dating, falling in love. And for 2.5 years, we traveled all over the world. We started off our journey by working with Bruce Harris with Save the
Oh,
Children down in Colombia,
Guatemala,
I'm sorry, in Bolivia.
Bolivia.
And
Okay.
my wife speaks beautiful Spanish. I speak guttural Spanish. And we have made travel a huge part of our life. After that 2 years, we found jobs and raised a family. And we then lived in Costa Rica for a year just to get our kids out of the country to show them what it's like here. To
Yeah.
understand your own country, you
Right.
need to live elsewhere, right?
Yep.
And then we ended up being in Montana through my career. So yeah, sorry, that's
No,
just one of those
that's
tales.
okay. So you know
That's about
you
as interesting as I get, by the
no,
way.
you bring up, but don't say it like that. You bring up names. So Tim Lane was in the first cast that I saw, and Tim and Shar were together in my cast when dating wasn't allowed, and that was all just funny to think
Right.
about now. And Dale Penny was the cast director, and Bruce Harris interviewed me.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I know I've said this on one of the other episodes, but since nobody listens, I don't think to all of the episodes,
Right.
on the application, it asked you what languages you spoke. And I was a senior in high school and I'd taken German. And then I said, and 17 years of English because I was 17 years old. And he
Right.
looked at me and he goes, American, my dear, American.
Right. Exactly.
I will never
Exactly.
forget, like, how many years has Bruce been gone, you know?
Yeah. Hmm.
And somewhere in all of the things that Bruce has said and sent before his passing, he wrote something to me. I think I had it like in a text message saved that about some of us are born and we shine brightly. We are stars that shine brightly, but are extinguished early.
Hmm.
And I thought that was such a,
Hmm.
I don't know, such an interesting phrase about him, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely. Well, he
they,
was a great guy to work with. And,
yeah,
I knew that he was down there in Bolivia, contacted him and said, "Hey, can I come and work with you for a while? I've got a, beautiful
yeah,
girlfriend here who speaks Spanish." He said, "Come on down. We'll hook you up and put me in the
that's,
in the
that's
campo in the
so
middle of
cool.
nowhere." Yeah,
That's
it
so
was really
cool.
fun. Really fun.
There's another man I interviewed recently, and he has been with the Peace Corps in Mongolia.
Wow.
And he is
Mm,
finishing his 2 years there. I had to look for Mongolia on the map. I don't know about you,
sure.
but it isn't like
Yeah.
we all know
Yeah.
exactly
Well, I'm
where.
going to pretend like I know where it is,
Yeah,
but
just
I
okay,
probably
yeah,
couldn't
right.
point it on the map. Yeah.
And stuff, and now he's going to one of the Pacific Islands for his third year, and he's in
Wow.
his 60s. And
Wow.
whoever we are, it doesn't change. It's just who we
Right.
are is who we are is who we are. And I love that about
Hmm.
this group of people that
Hmm.
lifelong learning, wanting to
Hmm.
go, wanting
Hmm.
to embrace. All right, so now you're in Montana, and everybody tells me that you've been mayor. Is that correct?
It is true. Yes, it
Of
is.
Great Falls, Montana. By the way, we performed in Great Falls in,
Did you really? What
yeah,
year?
the fall of 76. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you a funny story. We performed here on the Expo 74 tour to promote Expo in 1974. I moved here with my wife and toddler child in 1994, 20 years later.
Wow.
And then 20 years after that, in 2014, I was the mayor. So Great Falls, I was destined to be here.
You have these
And
increments.
yeah, exactly. So I've just retired. I was mayor for 8 years in this town. We're 60,000 people, 80,000 in the county. Very small, very involved community. My wife is a really active civic person, helped found a children's museum here. And she actually got a call one day and said, Sheila, we'd like you to run for office. And she handed me the phone and she said, I think this one's for you. And, I was retired, I guess, semi-retired, and
Yeah.
one thing led to another. And yeah, I was mayor for 8 years during COVID and all that stuff. It was very challenging.
What an interesting time. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really wonderful, it was a privilege, when you
Yeah.
do public service, and at that level, at the local level, it's not about the ideology. It's not about national
No,
conflicts.
right.
It's about people and potholes,
Yeah.
and helping connect
Your community.
groups that need help with each other. Yeah. So it was a real privilege and
I
glad I
think
did it.
I think that that is something I'm going to do a speech at a festival in my hometown at the end of July related to the book that I wrote. And part of
Uh,
that is going home to a place where everybody within a 30 to 40-year span, we all sledded on the same hill and skated on the same creek and
mhm,
knew all the same people. And
mhm.
now I have become my dad when I have to go back who lived there 3 generations ago, right?
Right.
That,
Right.
no, is it the house on Main Street that was
Right.
yada, yada, yada?
Right. Right.
But, and there are people there, the young woman in charge of this was in my junior choir. She
Yeah.
babysat for me,
Wow.
and she
Wow.
lives
And
in what was her great grandmother's house.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
the stories are different, um, but living life the best you can,
Yeah,
wherever.
and yeah, I think the thing about living in a town like we have, we've been here 31 years. Never thought we'd stay this long here, but we raised our kids here. I've got a son who's 32. My daughter's turning 30 here in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Um, to get to know a community, I mean, we've talked about traveling and being here and bouncing around all over the world, and I think a lot of people that watch this probably have similar experiences. But it's really been refreshing and something that I value highly. The fact that I live here, I was able to contribute to my community, get to know it. I walk down the street, you actually do know everybody. Yeah, and it's kind of fun. Of course,
Yeah.
no, yeah, I would ask people, do you know who the mayor is? And they go, no clue. So that wasn't the deal where I became a,
Right.
a mini celebrity, but it did allow me a perch to really look into so many aspects of our town. And
Yeah.
Great Falls is a really giving, wonderful community. And because we're not located on a big interstate, we're not a big flagship college town. People recognize if they want their town to improve, they have to do it themselves. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of social fabric here that really is fun and valuable, and I think it's great.
I have a book that a friend just gave me called The Girls with the Grandmother Faces.
Oh, okay.
And it came from a granddaughter who was at her grandmother's, and the grandmother said, she said, "Why are you cleaning?" And she said, "Because the girls are coming over." And she said, "Oh, what girls?" "Well, my bridge club." And the granddaughter said, "Oh, the girls with the grandmother faces." And I laughed at that, but and this was published in 96. I looked it up. So she's probably deceased based on how old she was when she wrote it. But she talked about front porches, Bob.
Hmm.
She talked,
Hmm.
and I think about sitting in my hometown with my father, having coffee after my mom died on the front porch.
Sure,
We don't have
that's
that
right.
in Tucson.
Right,
There's
right.
not, and when as a realtor, I did some door knocking in a historic neighborhood where I have a listing, and all I wanted to do was find out from the people if they paid extra for this park at the end of the road. That's all. There was one where the garage was open and there were 3 cars there, and I knocked on, and still nobody, I could hear them and nobody answered the door. And I
Hmm.
was like,
Hmm. Hmm.
gosh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I didn't have a preset appointment or something,
Sure, that's
for
right.
somebody.
That's
So
right.
the smaller, the towns where everybody knows your name, like with the Norm,
Yeah,
like the Cheers bar,
yeah.
right?
That's right. That's right.
And stuff like that. So you mentioned your kids. I was going to ask you, so you have a 32-year-old and someone turning 30. Did they ever have an interest in Up with People? Did you ever encourage that? Did either of them travel?
Well, no, yeah, they were interested only in the sense that I would tell stories about it. And then probably when they were 10 and 7 or 9 and 6, so my
Mhm.
son's older and daughter is younger, we went to a show. And unfortunately, it was one of those shows that had a lot of technical issues. We've all had them. The sound went out a couple times. It wasn't really that loud. It was not our finest moment as an Up with People group.
Yeah.
And they came back and they were very polite. At least I remember them being polite, although I'm sure once they got upstairs and they were like, what was that all about? So they really did not have any interest in that at all. And, they'll hear the stories. They're very polite about listening to me if I start to go down that road, which I don't do very often. And they get it.
Yeah.
And I have friends who just crucify me about the whole up with people thing, especially at the halftime when I watch the Super
Oh,
Bowl.
everybody
It's
does.
all over, right? Yeah, exactly.
And then
And
everybody, all the alumni remind people that we did more half times than
that's
anybody
right.
else has
That's
ever.
right. That's right. So, yeah, my kids appreciate it. They've been fortunate. They've done a lot of traveling themselves. They like that. But the idea of doing what up with people is that doesn't work for them.
It sounds like you have already, and I often ask people, we don't know if there's a future or what the future looks like. I don't think
Right.
everybody's ever going to be staying in people's homes for a long while, like
Right.
we did.
Right.
Um, and there's couch surfing, and there's this, and there's that, and you can go and travel and work at a hotel. So there's so many options for young people that didn't exist when we were
Right.
kids.
Right.
Um, but it sounds to me like you already have instilled in your children the joy of the world and the travel, and that you started that young when you were like in Costa Rica and everything.
Yeah, I hope so anyway. And I mean, to give credence to that, my daughter was working in Washington, D.C. and saved quite a bit of money at her job. She's very frugal and she kind of got tired of her job. And she said, you know what, Dad, Mom, I'm going to take a year. And this was 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And I'm just going to travel. And she quit for a year and she went around the world. I met her in Nepal. We spent 30 days together in Nepal. And she had, I said, you get there, I'll take care of you. I don't know where you are right now, but come on over and we'll meet in Kathmandu, which is really
Yeah,
fun actually. So she really had the bug and went that way. My son on the other side, he's been a lot of places, but he's really a homebody and he loves being in Great Falls. He's living with a great gal right now and has been with her for 10 years. And he's
wow.
like, no, I'm happy to be here. This is it. I'm happy. If you want to take me on a trip, Dad and Mom, I'll go.
But
But
otherwise, I'm cool.
uh, I'm good right here. So you never know what's going to take,
Yeah,
right? You never
yeah,
know.
they're all
So
different. Yeah.
that's right.
Um, we've got just a few minutes, and so I'm going to
Hmm.
ask you a couple of questions that I have forgotten to ask people lately. You've been all over the world. Is there a food that you love that you
Mm.
would love to go and don't say Italy because everybody wants to go back and get Italian food.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
pick something else that you think that maybe you were introduced to that.
I think two countries that I think are fantastic. One is Thai food. I mean, real
Oh,
Thai food in
okay.
Thailand. We spent 3 months there on our journey, and it was spectacular. Every meal was unbelievable.
Ah,
And then,
interesting.
except for the occasional food poisoning, the food in India is also spectacular.
Really?
And I will eat at an Indian restaurant at the drop of a hat.
You must
And
like spices because both
I
of those
do, I do,
countries,
but I like different flavors, and boy, they really are that way. And my wife's a vegetarian. I'm not. I'd eat meat, 24/7. But
right?
but so we've been able to. Anyway, those are the two best I like.
That's awesome. Okay, what about something? Did you ever have anything that you ate that you would never ever want to have again?
Yes, when I was a cast director, we went to South America, and our first city was in Bogota, and I
Okay.
was with Jose Luis, and we were at a fancy restaurant, and I didn't really speak much Spanish at the time, and I ordered something called ubre, and that is cow udder, and it was utterly disgusting. It was horrible,
Did
and I
Jose
eat
Luis know
everything.
what you were ordering?
Oh, probably, yeah. He may have encouraged me to do it, knowing him. And so, yeah, that was a meal I'd like to forget, but I will never order it again.
That is right. So, when you get a chance, Bob, find the interview that I did with Jose Luis.
I
I,
will, yeah.
I interviewed him in July before he knew he was sick,
Hmm.
and we were talking about his time with Mother Teresa,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
he and I dancing the Wabash Cannonball together, and neither one of us we looked at each other, started laughing, and then we just really didn't know what we were
Went there.
doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, I'm sure we were very professional, Donna. He
Of
goes, well,
course.
I was, I don't
He
know.
was exactly. It sounds like him. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I go
Exactly.
back and watch that every once in a while just because I love that man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the stories. So this is part of our, our legacy. I hope that
Yeah.
people
Hmm.
carry on. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I did recently, because when I was asking you about your kids, is I interviewed Phil Woods with my son, so Steve's son. And then I interviewed Dave Penny and Paul Konzemius, so the
Hmm.
Konzemius, all who had a parent or parents or a spouse or whatever that traveled and up with people. And that
Hmm.
was interesting to think, okay, what were their thoughts just growing up with people?
Hmm.
Some of them on the road, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, versus,
Yeah.
and then Tim's kids didn't travel. They were like, no, we had enough of that already with mom and
Hmm.
dad.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
just fascinating.
I think one of
Um,
the things my kids take away from it is the friendships,
yeah,
and how important that. My wife went to school in Tennessee, and she is still really good friends, 40 years later with 12 of her girlfriends from there. And,
it's awesome.
I talk about all the Up with People friends I have scattered around the world. And I
Yeah,
think they really appreciate how deep friendships can be, and they're worth
right.
working for.
Agreed. That's a great way to end this because I
Sure.
was going to ask for some words of wisdom, and I think that that's a great way to end this. And so what I'll do, Bob, I posted one just yesterday or whatever. So in a couple of weeks, I try to get a couple out a month. I'll post
Hmm.
this and I'll let you know that I
Hmm.
that I made it live. And I hope in the
Great.
meantime you check a few out. I think
Oh,
you
I will. Yeah.
into
Yeah.
Carolyn Lee and so the Arizona band, people that you're going to
Sure.
know, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And sharing the interviewing that band was funny because they're like a band of brothers that have a hard time not interrupting each other.
Yes, yes, exactly right. I
Um,
remember when they were on the road and Linda
yeah,
Manassi was the manager, and
yeah,
they had a lot of fun, but boy, they worked really hard.
they
They
did.
worked
They
really
did.
hard.
Thank you for your time this morning. I'm
You
glad it
bet.
worked out. And if you're ever in Tucson, I'd love to meet you in person. And
I'll find you. And Donna, congratulations on your award as the contributing to the Alumni Association that
thank you
I
very
saw on
much
your Facebook page. Well done.
because
Well
this
done.
is much fun for me to do.
Cool. Cool.
All
Okay.
right, I'm
Thanks
going
so
to
much.
stop the recording.
All right. Bye bye.